Well, Lord knows that there are enough 80s retro channels out there, and toy collectors and comic collectors and that sort of thing. It's not really the brand of my channel. Nobody's watching my channel because they want 80s retro stuff that everybody else is doing. And my video is unboxing the G.I. Joe Classified Sergeant Slaughter is one of my worst, least viewed videos. Nevertheless, I am a child of the 80s, and I do collect some of that stuff as well. Here's a fun little retro Optimus Prime figure that I picked up a couple weeks ago now. That's a lot of fun. I did grow up in the time period. I do have some nostalgic connections to it, even though I'm mostly collecting like the retro horror 1930s, 40s, 50s sort of stuff. But I really did want to do this video today here because I have been catching up on the so-called the Energon universe, the comics by Skybound Entertainment, published through Image Comics, that are this interweaving universe of Transformers and G.I. Joe. And they are so good. They are so good that I want to do a commentary on it. Because not just are they just good, solid entertainment, but I'm, as you might know from watching my other videos, if you've watched my other videos, I am quite cynical about modern entertainment. That's why I love the retro stuff so much. And these comics are actually delivering on modern entertainment, and if they can warm my frigid heart, maybe they'll warm yours as well. So what is going on with these comics is this interweaving universe. It's actually like a cinematic universe done properly. It's this slow burning, slow build of these different series that are building up to these Transformers and GI Joe comics, these new versions of them, with this shared universe built around Energon, the liquid glowing goo that Transformers use for energy. And it's building up to this shared universe with these things. It's this great slow burn, slow build that is covering a lot of interesting different ground with these things. So what is going on here? Well, the story begins with Void Rivals, which is a science fiction comic. Here's Volume 2, Volume 1, Volume 2. It's a science fiction comic set. There's this ring planet around this like black hole, and there's these two factions on either side of the ring who are at war with each other, and they're fighting as they're losing resources. They're fighting for their survival against one another. And okay, all well and good. It's just like some sci-fi story. It's okay, two different species overcoming their differences and so on. But then, in like the middle of one of the issues, suddenly Jetfire pops up, the Transformer, and it's like, wait a second, what? And you find out that this actually does tie into Transformers lore. And what I am loving about this, the framing story itself, it's building up as you get into the second volume of it here, because I'm going by the trade paperbacks. It's building up to that these species here at war with each other have some deep connection with Transformers history and Transformers lore in this new shared universe. But what I'm loving about this is that this is covering the ground of the movie and season 3 of Generation 1 Transformers. In fact, that's Springer right on the cover there. He becomes a major character in this comic. And so when the original Transformers, the G1 Transformers, turned into more of like this space opera with Transformers the movie and with season 3 of the original cartoon, you get the different tone, the different space opera. And that's what's being covered in Void Rivals. So you have Springer appear, Hot Rod also appears, Quintessons appear, all these different planets in G1. So like Quintessa and Char and so on, they appear in this comic. So if you like, the movie characters, Hot Rod Springer, the Quintessons, all that sort of stuff. If you like that space opera Transformer stuff from the movie in season 3, then this is filling that gap, and it's got that space opera sort of dynamic to it. So that this is I'm enjoying this a lot. It's not the story with the characters, the new species that they've created here for this book, isn't necessarily like a story that needed to be told. Like, it's not quite that great, but the fact that it's meshing in slowly, it's a slow burn, meshing in with that space opera Transformers stuff from G1 in the movie and post movie. That's what I'm loving about this. And the movie is like my Transformers. So my background, I was there in the 80s with Transformers right from the beginning. 1984, 85, the original Transformers, but I was born in like December 77. So I was there for when Transformers started. But Transformers, the movie, hit 1986. I'm almost 10 years old. Um, just the right time to really capture my imagination. And I still, to this day, love Transformers, the movie, the original animated film. It's like the only part of G1 that actually holds up. If you try to watch Generation 1 today, it's really tough slog because the animation quality doesn't hold up as well as one might like. And the storylines, well, it was a cartoon meant for kids, right? But the movie still holds up. The production values are good enough in the movie that it still holds up. So to me, that's still my Transformers, is the movie and the season 3 characters. And so this is them. This is where they get to be expressed in this new universe. So I'm enjoying that a whole lot. So there's that. The space opera Transformer stuff is in Void Rivals. Now, the appearance of Jetfire in Void Rivals, of course, leads directly into the Transformers comic, which is freaking great. And what is so freaking great about it is that this first story arc is contained in this first volume here. It's essentially a rewrite of the original sort of like pilot four-parter of the Transformers Generation 1 cartoon. But it's rewritten for adults. But, caveat with that one, for adults, but it's not like the edgy wannabe adult stuff that teenagers do. It's got to be all edgy and violent and sexual and stuff like that. It's not like that. It's still fundamentally true to the characters. It's not revisionist. It's not actually the Autobots are the bad guys. The Decepticons are sort of misunderstood heroes. Which is why, like, I actually still haven't even seen Transformers 1. For two reasons. I've heard it's good, but I'm not a big fan of the mythological origin for Transformers. So there's sort of two competing origins for Transformers. Right? There's the cartoon, G1 cartoon, where the Transformers were built as a slave race by the Quintessons and enslaved by them and sold off as consumer goods. In fact, the Autobots were like construction equipment and the Decepticons were military equipment. And then the Transformers eventually revolted against their Quintesson masters, chased them off planet, and then there was like this age of peace, but then the Decepticons, being military equipment, can't help themselves, and the Great War between the Autobots and Decepticons starts. The other origin is this big grand mythological one where you have Unicron and you have Primus, and they're like the yin and yang, good and evil, chaos and order. And then Primus becomes Cybertron, and he gives rise to the 13 Primes, who then give rise to the rest of the Transformer race. So Transformers 1 is following that mythological origin. I'm not as big a fan of that. Weirdly enough, even though I am religious, I like a more naturalistic origin for the Transformers. And then the other reason is that it follows that whole idea of from the aligned continuity, where you get the 13 Primes mythological origin from. That really Megatron is just like a misunderstood revolutionary, and I'm not a big fan of that. I like, I can accept nuance and moral gray areas and all that sort of stuff um, with a lot of things, but not with Transformers, not with my giant fighting robots. That I want good and evil. And I don't want the Decepticons as misunderstood revolutionaries. I want the Decepticons as bad guys. Um, so this keeps that. So far, at least. I haven't got volume 2 yet. But this seems to keep with that sort of vein. So, you know the story. The Transformers, they crash on Earth, a volcanic eruption, they rise up, they start recovering, and they're fighting over Energon. They're fighting for the energy they came to Earth to get. And but this is done in a much more mature way. The human characters are much more nuanced in how they're written. The Transformers, you again, much more mature written, still true to the characters, but written much more maturely. So what do I mean with that? It's one thing to say it. Starscream is such a rat bastard in this comic, and I love it. So there is a part here where the Transformers are fighting in the town, and the humans don't know which ones are the good ones, which ones are the bad ones. They just see these robots rampaging and destroying their city. So they open fire on all of them. And Spike gets caught in the crossfire, and he gets injured. Optimus Prime, he then takes Spike and drives to the hospital, rushes him to the hospital, because Optimus Prime wants to save lives. Starscream chases them, gets to the hospital, and realizes that, oh, this is where you take the squishies to repair them, and opens fire on the hospital. And it's like, you rat bastard! He's like just so evil for the sake of it. Because he also recognized the tactical opportunity. One, he just wants to kill the squishies because he can, and two, he knows that Optimus Prime wants to protect them. So he has a tactical reason for doing it. Like, that was brilliant in that it's mature, but it's not dishonest to the characters. It's not revisionist to the characters. It's actually doing the characters more so in a more adult sort of milieu, in a storyline that it can actually hold up to scrutiny from adults reading it, as opposed to like the original G1 cartoon. Another moment that I loved in this with Starscream is that the Transformers are being brought back online very slowly, as they have energy to do it and the technology to repair them. And so the Decepticon forces, they've managed to take over the Ark, but Teletran 1 is out of commission. Teletran 1's been disabled. To repair it, they need Cybertronian parts. And they don't have Cybertronian parts. And the only three Decepticons that are raised at this point are Starscream, Soundwave, and Skywarp. But Skywarp has just been injured he's been damaged in a fight with the Autobots. So they need Cybertronian parts. They don't have Cybertronian parts. But then Starscream and Soundwave look at Skywarp. Skywarp is made of Cybertronian parts. So they cannibalize Skywarp's body, rip him apart alive, to repair Teletran 1, so they can bring up the rest of the Decepticons. And then when Thundercracker gets brought back to life, he sees Skywarp cannibalized to repair Teletran 1, and he blames the Autobots for that, because they're in the Autobot ship, right? And Starscream and Soundwave are like, yep, it was the Autobots. Absolutely brilliant. That the Decepticons are evil, and the Autobots are good, but they're written with that elevated in storytelling that would not fly in the children's cartoon. But it's not like edgy violent for the sake of it. It's not revisionist. I love it. Absolutely love it. So this is like the original like 4-parter of the cartoon rewritten for adults and actual adults, people who were in their 40s instead of in their 20s. Absolutely brilliant storytelling. Loved this comic. This was absolutely great. Now, that leads to another comic, which is Duke. So in the Transformers comic, you have this plane, it's flying along, and then suddenly encounters this other plane that opens fire on them and transforms into a giant robot. And in this altercation, you find out one of the passengers in one of the U.S. Air Force planes is Duke. Now, Duke, that spins off into its own comic, where Conrad Hauser, codenamed Duke, one of the brightest lights of the U.S. military, and he wants answers. He wants answers as to who built this plane that transforms into a giant robot that killed his friend. And the U.S. military has like furloughed him. Like, no, you can't. You don't investigate this, Duke. Don't look into this. Just leave it alone. And he can't do that. And so now he's looking for answers. He goes AWOL, and he's looking for answers. And what ensues is this like fantastic like espionage thriller. And so that's what we get here, right? We've got the sci-fi space opera in Void Rivals. We've got Transformers G1 rewritten for 40-year-old men who grew up with Transformers. And now we get this espionage thriller, this like post-Jason Bourne espionage thriller thing in Duke. And through this comic now, we're bringing in these G.I.Joe characters in this very interesting, incredible way. We're slowly introducing them throughout the book here. and different concepts as well. So like Duke's story brings him around to Mars Corporation, which is the weapons manufacturer owned by Destro. But you also find out that like why Duke is being sort of pushed away from all this is that of course Mars is dealing with the US government, right? So there's a lot of deep rooted tendrils going on here. And the US military doesn't want Duke finding out. Um, so you get this whole espionage thriller here, and you've got like some of the characters that we'll know from G.I. Joe who are actually hunting Duke, and Duke is allied with other ones from G.I. Joe, and all this is leading up towards the formation of G.I. Joe, Covert Special Missions Force. So great espionage thriller here. Now Duke is running concurrently with Cobra Commander, which is the big lore book I'm finding. Void Rivals is the sci-fi stuff, and it's got lore in it. Transformers is Transformers. The Duke is the espionage thriller that's leading up to G.I. Joe. Cobra Commander is the companion book to Duke in the sense that this is talking about Cobra Commander's rise to power. How does Cobra get formed? And this one, I've seen some reviews, some reviews that are likening this more to like a horror vibe. I'm not quite seeing that, although there are certainly elements of it. But this is the big lore book. This is saying a lot of the underlying lore that's going to come to fruition in storylines later on. And what I'm loving about this one is, for one, it presents Cobra Commander as a competent villain. I love stuff like that. Like, my favorite version of He-Man is actually the 2002 He-Man, because Skeletor is actually a competent villain in it. He's an actual threat and not just like a comic villain. A lot of 80s stuff was comic villains because they don't want the bad guys to be too bad and scare the little kids. But this is Cobra Commander as a competent villain, an excellent manipulator of people. But it fuses together the two different origins for Cobra Commander. So in the toys and in the comics, the old Marvel comics, Cobra Commander, he was a used car salesman, which is basically a commentary that he's just a scummy manipulator. And he has become disaffected from the system, and he wants to tear the system down. And that's, he founds Cobra and pulls together all these other people who've been disaffected by the system, arms dealers and revolutionaries and so on. I think that the Baroness's original biography, as she was like this wealthy college student who became this terrorist just out of like boredom and left-wing extremism. It's like, okay, Larry Hama, who wrote all these, he was a military guy. But that's the sort of the comic book and the toy origin. Is he's a human used car salesman who gets disaffected with the system and creates a terrorist organization to destroy the system. Okay. Then in the cartoon, they never really talk about Cobra Commander's origins until G.I. Joe the movie, where you find out that actually he was this scientist from this underground lost civilization called Cobra Law, which is all built around like sort of bioengineering stuff. And he gets disfigured in an accident, and then he gets sent to the surface world to form Cobra as kind of this terrorist organization to weaken the world, to prepare it for Cobra Law rising up from underground and conquering the planet. Super wacky, super out there, and like never touched on again in G.I. Joe history because it was just so out there. In the toys, it only ever came out as like this 3 set of figures of Globulus, leader of Cobra Law, Nemesis Enforcer, who's like the cool, like mute villain, tough guy villain, and the Royal Guards. And then didn't come up in the comics or anything either. Well, this comic manages to pull those different things together into one narrative and tie that into the whole Energon universe storyline. So Cobra Commander, he is a disaffected human who's been disaffected from the system, and he gets adopted into society in Cobra Law, this underground society based on bioengineering. And while he's down there, he acquires a specimen that changes his view on everything. And that specimen is Megatron, the body of Megatron, who is missing from the Transformers comic. He's not in the Ark. Where is he? And you see like this last panel splash in Transformers comic that he's in the Arctic somewhere, or Antarctic. And we find out what happens to his body. It gets it gets found and taken away by Cobra Commander, and it's down in Cobra Law. And this results in two things. So one, it makes Cobra Commander aware of Energon, this energy source. All right, and it's under that pretense that Cobra Commander is like, okay, Globulus, give me a title, give me the freedom to go to the surface world, and I will find Energon for you so that you can invade the surface world. Okay, but something else goes on. Cobra Commander, he also gets into Megatron's databanks, and he finds out about Transformers and Cybertronians and everything else out there in the universe. And that changes his perspective. That sort of the bioengineering ways of Cobra Law are not the future, and that by making use of this Energon technology, the Cybertronian technology, he can actually conquer the world for himself. And so that's his real motivation, right? Is that he wants to create Cobra as his personal army, his vehicle to conquer the world, using Energon and Cybertronian technology and so on. Now, Cobra Law, they don't trust Cobra Commander either. So their plan is actually to send him to the surface to get this Energon and then kill him and then conquer the world. And when they discover Megatron, they are not happy campers because they're built around bioengineering. So a race entirely of machines is like anathema. That is to them like the ultimate evil, the ultimate blasphemy. That is blah. And so they want. So it's setting up this multiple sort of pronged storyline here, where Cobra Commander, he is trying to use Energon and Cybertronian technology and all that sort of stuff to conquer the world for himself. And he's got Megatron mad at him now, because he basically tortured Megatron. And he's got Cobra Law mad at him. And Cobra Law is also mad at Transformers existing at all. So you got this multi-pronged thing. Now, Cobra Commander himself, in his journeys on the surface world, that's where he starts to pull together these different factions. So he's got the Dreadnoks in there. He has these great encounters with the Dreadnoks, and how he manipulates the Dreadnoks is just like, chef's kiss. He's manipulating the Dreadnoks, brings them into the fold of Cobra, and he also gets the attention of Mars Corporation, Destro, and pulls them in as well. And all these different little factions, they don't trust each other either, right? So Cobra Commander, he's got these intentions inside Cobra, and he's an enemy of Megatron and an enemy of Cobra Law, and Cobra Law are enemy of the Transformers. And it's just like, oh, there's a lot of little threads that are going to come out later on in this Energon universe that are really interesting. I can't wait to see those. Then we got Scarlet. And this is one of the most recent ones, sort of the second wave, right? I haven't got the second Transformers trade paperback yet. I haven't got the Destro trade paperback, because there's a series on looking at Destro's point of view. Haven't got that yet. But Scarlet, this is where the ninjas come into it, because you can't have G.I.Joe without the ninjas, right? So Scarlet, she is a covert ops agent for the U.S. military. And she's on a mission, and on this mission, she comes across Jinx. Now, Jinx, as you might know from G.I. Joe, if you grew up with it, she is the female G.I. Joe ninja. Now, Jinx and Scarlet are friends? They're more than sisters. And there's this, like, okay, you see these flashbacks of them as roommates. And you're not sure, are they roommates or are they roommates, right? They don't bring it up. And we'll talk about this later and why this is interesting. But anyways, runs into Jinx's mission. Jinx has been missing for 2 years because she's been infiltrating the Arashikage clan, who are this clan of ninjas who are players in the underworld, criminal underworld, and weapons dealing, all sort of stuff. Jinx has been undercover with them. Scarlet sees her and is like, oh my god, I have to get back to Jinx. And so Scarlet, at the bequest of this covert operations team that Stalker works for, as we met in the Duke comic, they get Scarlet to go in undercover with the Arashikage clan. And they make a test for her, because the Arashikage are having problems with another clan, and this other clan has stolen this weapon, this ancient ancestral weapon of the Arashikage clan. And so they have to do this big operation to get it back. And so Scarlet, she's in with Jinx and Storm Shadow and stuff like that. No Snake Eyes yet. Don't worry, he's coming, probably. Well, of course he's coming. but they goes a big operation, and they get back this weapon. And this weapon turns out to be a katana made of Energon, which is why it has Cobra's attentions, because this fight ends with Cobra. So the Arashikage clan now are also fighting Cobra, and so it'll be interesting to see how and if, like, the in this storyline, if the Arashikage get pulled into Cobra as well, and how that is going to work, and how that tension, especially since Storm Shadow's historical storyline is that he's in and out of Cobra, right? He is Cobra at first, then he's with G.I.Joe, then he goes back to Cobra. If you follow Resolute, G.I.Joe Resolute, the cartoon that was made when the 80s kids became 25. And we had our first wave of nostalgia, and oh my god, I'm getting old. Now we're in our 40s, and so this is the new version of that. So the ninjas, hooray for ninjas, and we get to see like where this storyline goes with the Arashikage and the ninjas, and how Snake Eyes is going to come into this and all sort of stuff. So, good stuff. Good stuff. We got our ninja thriller. We've got our sort of lore political thriller. We've got our espionage thriller. We've got Transformers G1 rewritten for adults. And we've got our like space opera, sci-fi Transformer stuff. Great stuff. Great stuff. Loving it. Loving these comics. And why do they get so much attention? They are just solidly good stories. Well written. And where of course I kind of first heard about it and whatever was all of these on YouTubers being like, oh, it's not woke, and yeah, it's not, in the sense that these are good stories first, and sort of they do have representation in them. They race swapped Carly. They might have even race swapped Spike, it's hard to tell. But they did race swap Carly, but they also made her like a real character. Yeah, she's not blonde hair, blue eyed anymore, but that's fine because she's an actual character, and that's the deal, right? Scarlet, it's kind of up in the air about what exactly Jinx and Scarlet's relationship is, which is fine because they could say that yes, they are a couple, and that wouldn't bother me, because the relationship between them is what drives this story along. Is that Scarlet is infiltrating the Arashikage because she wants to find and save Jinx. And that's the difference, right? Representation is great. I've said this on live streams and stuff, and I'll say this again here. I love real representation. And what I mean is, I like when you have different groups, different peoples, different cultures, different religions authentically represented, and that representation actually is what drives the story along, right? I love watching movies from other cultures. In fact, I just realized the other day that like a few months ago, I actually bought like the entire Chinese Monkey King trilogy of movies, and I haven't actually sat down and watched them yet. And I've been meaning to do that. I was reminded of that the other day. That's a Chinese folktale adapted into movies from China, and I want to watch that. That's real representation, right? I had a laugh at the faux representation of the controversy over The Witcher 3, the video game, when people were complaining about how it's not representational, it's not inclusive, because it's a video game by a Polish studio based on Polish books by a Polish author based on Polish mythology about the Polish Middle Ages. And it wasn't inclusive because it wasn't replicating the demographics of Los Angeles. It's like, no, you dumbasses. That's representation. Polish work by Polish authors in a Polish game studio based on Polish mythology, that is representation, right? Chinese movies based on a classic of Chinese literature, Chinese mythology, that is representation. Anime is implicitly representation because it's from Japan by Japanese people. That's authentic representation. And I love seeing that. I don't like the pandering representation, where it's just Americans who are overwriting everything else with America and American culture and American demographics, and more specifically Los Angeles, California culture, California demographics. and doing it in this really pandering way that is just like, oh, look, she's the black character. Oh, she's the lesbian. Whatever. Um, and it doesn't actually do anything for the story. It's just there to wag its finger at you, about how you're bad because you're not these things. You're the white villain. You're the white male villain. Whatever. Straight people are holding us down. Cis people are holding us down. Whatever. Um, I want to see stories about LGBTQ2 plus AA people, um, but the stories where that's matters. Like, yes, there is something to be said for, yeah, it's a character who happens to be gay. That's fine. But it's like, okay, if you're gonna rub people's nose in it, then like make that the interesting part of the story, and not just pietist finger wagging. Um, when I was in college, I watched Queer as Folk, because it was a show about gay culture and the issues that were facing gay people, um, there in the early 2000s. Um, and that was the interesting part about it. Scarlet, like, this works because that relationship between Scarlet and Jinx drives the story along. Um, Carly works as a character because they made her a character with her own dreams and goals and ambitions and talents and everything else. It's not just, oh, the only interesting thing about her is that she's diverse. Like, no, they just made her race swapped, but they made her a character in the process, and that's what makes it work. So yeah, these aren't woke, but they do have diversity and representation in them. Um, but it's not wagging its finger at you. It's an actual integrated, important part of the story. They make Carly an actual character. They make the relationship between Jinx and Scarlet drive the story along, and that all works, and it's well written. And that's how you should do it. Is that it's not this finger wagging representation, faux representation, but it's actually an integrated part of the story that's well written. Um, Sermon over. But otherwise, these are just good stories, well written. And if you grew up with these characters, Duke and Cobra Commander, G.I. Joe, Transformers, and you're now in your 40s, and you want a really well done cinematic universe of of these multiple stories all coming together in a version of what you loved as a kid, reworked and rewritten for you as an adult now. These are perfect. These are great. So don't sleep on these. Don't sleep on this comic. This is a great comic, and you still have the chance to get in on the ground floor, because right now it's only like what's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, if we count Destro and Volume 2 Transformers. So still easy to get on the ground floor of this stuff. Don't sleep on this. This has got Monster Kid Corey's seal of approval as someone who is deeply cynical about modern entertainment, um, and how it's done. Um, this is it. This is the good stuff right here. Um, so if you're interested in Transformers, interested in G.I. Joe, if you're an old geezer like me and you grew up with them and you want something that's new but not preaching at you and it's just really well written, there you go. That's what you should get in on this.